All right, call to order. Start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Roll call.
Mr. Bordenaro?
Here.
Mr. Fernandez?
Here.
Mr. Grady?
Here.
Ms. McNair?
Here.
Mr. Miller? Paradis?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay. I want to thank everyone that's here and online. I know there's a lot of effort that goes into this budget. Probably about 3-4 months ago start. So I appreciate all the department managers, the effort that they put in, and we're going to go through it, and so it's a pretty high budget, but we'll work through it and see where we go. Our goal is to be fiscally responsible and provide, necessary services for all our, town folks. So with that, I'll leave it to you. All right.
Good evening, everyone. The finance, members of town council, board of education, and the public. So for those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Ryan Curley. I'm the new town manager as of exactly 2 months ago. So it's been such a wonderful time here for myself, getting to become acclimated with the town of Berlin, as well as the budget process with all of our wonderful town employees. And so I just want to start off by saying, as Sal just mentioned, the budget process it's a long process. So I'm coming in, midway through on this. And so a lot of work was already done, coming in. And I do want to thank Kevin here and his staff in the finance department, as well as all of our top managers and department heads. They really do a phenomenal job, not just day in and day out at what they normally do, but also through the budget process, prioritizing, making sure that the residents of Berlin are getting the most for their tax dollars. And we are not just planning for the day to day, but we're planning for the future of the town of Berlin as well. And I do want to say that, in my opinion, the town of Berlin is in great shape. It really is. It makes my job as an incoming town manager easier when I come in and things are running very well. And so, you should all be very, very proud of that as well. So I do want to point out, I'm sure as the Board of Finance has seen, the increase right now is high. I was joking in my past role where I've come from, I probably would not have put forward a budget that would, have the increase in expenses that we do this year. However, me coming in, in a midway point, we can get a lot done with this budget as it stands right now. And so I think the budget that we've put forward gives the Board of Finance as well as the town council a wealth of options, and to see what do you want to accomplish and what do you see for the priorities of the town of Berlin in the upcoming fiscal year. And so while there's plenty of capital in this budget, we have about $4.2 million of capital right now, which is needed for the town, and it's important that we plan ahead for that. We also had some good things happen to the town. The governor's budget brought in an additional $1.1 million in education cost sharing grant funds for the town, which is great. We have strong grand list growth. This was a challenging year, not just for us in Berlin, but across the state. Many of you may have heard about the change in motor vehicle valuations that occurred this year. And it really put all 169 towns in the state behind when it came to the grand list this year. And even still, even with this change in valuation, Berlin had a 1.39% growth in the grand list. And I think that I'm sure Kevin will talk a little bit briefly, but it's $1.2 million in new funding, new revenue to the town because of that. So it's important that we talk about that. And I do want to say, so I think it's right now there's the drivers of the budget are, like I mentioned, capital items, as well as some projects, a lot of engineering and design work, architecture and design work for 9, and we'll talk about it later in the slides, but 9 projects that are in the budget. And so it's going to be up to the Board of Finance as well as the town council to direct us to see what the priorities are. And so me being new, I didn't want to make that decision for, myself. That's for our elected leaders in town. And so that's why we're here this evening. But I really do believe that the budget overall is very strong, and there's ways that we can find savings as needed. And we'll go from there. So just to explain what's going to happen here is I'm going to invite Kevin, our finance director, Kevin Delaney, up to talk about the overall budget, revenue, and transfers, long-term liabilities, as well as the capital that I just mentioned. And then our Board of Education Chair, Julia Dennis, is going to come up to do a brief presentation on the Board of Education operating side. And then I'm going to come back up to talk about the general government operating, as well as our water control. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin and look forward to the presentation. Thank you all.
Good evening again. Back at this. We'll start in with the kind of overall budget. So where it stands is $113.2 million, a $10 million increase, or 10%. What that means from a mill rate perspective. Per state statute, the motor vehicle mill rate has to be capped at 32.46. We haven't been at this level in a couple of years. And that would leave the real estate and personal property to pick up the balance of the budget, which would translate to 32.81 mils, or a 2.6 mil increase. As Ryan said, the grand list right now is $2,970 million, or $2.97 million for 1 mil. Berlin did have the same impact, as you've probably heard on the news and from others, for the motor vehicle. It was a substantial hit revaluing motor vehicle. But Berlin did have the benefit of a single taxpayer, one business, investing $60 million into additional personal property. So those two barbell elements led to a 1.4% increase in the grand list. There are really 4 main drivers to this big increase. The first is capital. Last year, we had $117,000 of capital. There was 1 machine for the golf course and $50,000 in the budget for local match on grants. So it is a substantial increase, but it's coming against a very low level. BOE operations, Julia will speak in a little bit about that. Town operations, which Ryan will speak to after Julia's done. And then finally, debt. As a reminder, in last year's budget, the board elected to defer the principal for the debt that was borrowed in October of this year for 1 year. So you are seeing a budget which has both FY25 principal and FY26 principal and interest for proposed debt service. This eye chart, as you've seen every year, really shows the overall picture. One thing I do want to draw your attention to, because whenever you see brackets on the revenue, there are questions. First, I'll start at the bottom, use of fund balance. We've used fund balance for 2 things during the budget process for the last several years. One is to fund contingency. So there's $300,000 of contingency. It is pulled from fund balance. That way we don't tax local taxpayers for the possibility of an expenditure. We essentially appropriate savings in the event something significant and unexpected happens. The second has been to fund the actuarial determined employer contribution for the closed pension plan. The reduction is because the liability and the needed funding for that plan has gone down. So while it's a reduction in revenue, there's an equal offsetting reduction on the expenditure side, which is good news. We'll get into some more of the details on this a little bit later. Just to hit the pie chart quickly, the total budget pie chart is a split between education and general government of 59% to 41%. If you took that on a pure operating basis, so you strip out capital, you strip out debt, strip out pension, it's 62 and 38. So roughly in that 60-40 neighborhood, which is consistent with what we've seen for years and consistent with what we see for other towns as well. And then I just want to go over, as I do each year, to remind you of the municipal spending cap. In the event that the community exceeds the spending cap, which is either 2.5% or inflation, you see the 3.1% that was put out there by OPM. So that's the threshold. It's a little bit higher than 2.5%, but not much. We basically have to cut about $3.6 million in order to stay under that cap. If the town doesn't, then it starts to lose funding on a supplemental revenue grant, should that be offered. And those reductions need to come in areas that are not listed here. So there's already an adjustment for debt service, for special ed, for capital, and payment of unfunded pension liabilities. So it really is a matter of the operations of the community not rising above 3.31%. As you start to think about the budget and the costs and things involved, one of the key elements that's always discussed is fund balance. It's the town's savings account, basically. So that number has ranged anywhere from about 13%, and it's been as high as almost 20%. You may recall, for those who've been around the Board of Finance for a few years, there was a 3 or 4 year period where we were intentionally keeping that number high in anticipation of lump sum cash payouts for the closed pension plan. And it worked out between 21 and 22 when the town paid $5.5 million in payouts for folks who retired. So that worked out. Balance went down to about 13%, but it has come back up, projecting a surplus for this year from several factors, and projecting a fund balance of about 16.5%, which is solid within government finance officers' standards and other market standards. It's solid within historical standards. It's not excessive, but it does give you flexibility, and it gives you some coverage in the event of unforeseen events. You are substantially above the 5% state floor, so that's not an issue. And you are well above the 11% town established floor policy as well. So I don't see any issues with your fund balance there. Finally, I brought this up last year, and I'll just point out, government finance officers has been encouraging municipalities around the country to do a risk-based model. So not just establishing a hard number and saying get to 17% or 15% or some number, but really based on the characteristics of the town. The items in green are some real positives for the community. There's not a lot of expenditure volatility. This is a fairly predictable budget model. The town has pretty strong liquidity, and the other funds, like the health insurance fund, general insurance fund, Berlin Water Control, are not dependent on the general fund. They're strong on their own. A couple of things that are a bit of a challenge is vulnerability to extreme events. And one of our areas with the most significant capital is our public works facility down off Mercerio Drive. A portion of that, with a fair amount of equipment and personnel, is in a floodplain, and it does flood. So that obviously is a risk. And then the other is capital projects. We've consistently deferred capital projects, which can lead to spikes down the line, and that's something that we'd like to avoid. Before I jump into revenue, I'll pause for any questions on the overview if you have them.
Well, Kevin, on the capital projects, I mean, I hear what you're saying there, but we've used surplus funds the last 2, 3 years in terms of millions of dollars. So let's not forget that we just purposely said we're going to have surplus at the end of the year. So we didn't fund capital to the level within the budget, which is an advantage and disadvantage because it's not in the budget itself, but we have used surplus, considerable amount of surplus. Just, okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right, I'll move on to revenue. This is the good news portion of the presentation. So I'm sure everybody here recalls the Renovate is New project for Berlin High School. It has been around for a number of years, so we have not forgotten about the money that remains to be owed by the state. It's been a few years, but the state has provided us just over $2.6 million in the bank and has moved the project to final audit. That may mean a couple of years before the final audit is done. Security vestibules took just shy of 2 years to have that final piece done. But fortunately, we're down to about $500,000 left of what we've requested for reimbursement. So this 2.6 million is actual cash in the bank received. My recommendation to you, as you can see on the bullet, is not to use this for ongoing operating costs, salaries, benefits, et cetera. It would be it's one-time revenue. This is classic one-time revenue. You really want to use it for one-time non-recurring items. As I say in the last bullet, it's in a non-lapsing fund. So you don't have to rush the decision, but naturally you have a lot of things you'd like to do, and sitting on 2.6 million is probably not something you'd like to do either. Listed a few things for your consideration. I am sure there is a very long list that people have of using the money, but some things to consider. One would be potentially funding some of the capital requested in this budget. Some of it might be to offset the bonding, potentially eliminating it if you took this money and some fund balance that we just talked about. You could replace the 3.5 million and not bond this year and yet do the work. You could dedicate it to the HVAC projects. The town already borrowed 2.4 million this past October. If you dedicated the rest of this money, you'd have over $5 million, which would allow substantial operational cash money that could then be used to fund the project as we seek reimbursements through the cycle. You could also apply it to the upcoming East Berlin Pool Park upgrades. There might be a better title, but that's kind of what I'm calling it right now. But that is something that the council has viewed as a priority and would like to do, and you could dedicate it towards that. It wouldn't fully cover the cost, but it would be substantial. The McGee Science classroom upgrades, you have classrooms that are from the late 60s and in need of upgrades. And this may be enough money to take care of that project. The goal would be to go out and do some architectural work in the next few months and really get some more hard numbers. So these are just some considerations. It is a nice problem, if you will, to have during budget season. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that, and I'll pause if there's any questions on that one because it's a little bit different for the budget. Okay. Revenue. As we've seen regularly and as communities similar to Berlin, 88% of general fund expenses are covered by taxes. A substantial amount is paid through this way. We continue to utilize a 99.3% collection rate, and Debbie Swan and the Revenue Collector's Office continue to do a phenomenal job of hitting or beating that target. As Ryan mentioned earlier, the town received about 1.1 million of additional ECS money in the governor's budget. It's not a guarantee that the final budget will have it, but traditionally the legislature has held or increased these numbers and are not big fans of cutting when there's something favorable. One thing I will point as we go into it, and I'm not suggesting where you should put the Board of Ed number, but just be mindful of the minimum budget requirement calculation. And it does include the consideration that if ECS goes up, the expectation is that the Board of Ed budget would go up as well. So that's not saying where you should set the number. It's just there is a substantial penalty if the town were to not include this in the increase for the Board of Ed. User fees, there's a couple fees that did go up. Building inspection was increased to $100,000. We continue to see strong economic development, and with that come building permit revenues. And the golf course increased fees, netted about $74,000 of an increase there to help with increased operating costs. Saul and the group there have done a really great job of meeting the standard and the spirit of the ordinance by achieving a surplus and being able to put that back into equipment and other things out in the course and make some investments there. So they want to keep that momentum going. Interest income was decreased $200,000. The last couple of years, we've had the benefit of ARPA money as the HVAC project was being completed and lots of pre-funding for the 3-road project on Porter's Pass, Deming Road area. Those projects are nearing completion and that money isn't there now. Combine that with the declining interest rates over the last several months, the opportunity to achieve what we've achieved just doesn't seem feasible going into the coming year. Fund balance continues to fund, as I mentioned earlier, contingency and the closed DB ADEC. Any questions on revenue before we move on?
So,
Sorry.
So the original estimate that we did when we did the budget for this year, we were budgeting at about 80%. It was what we were supposed to get back. Now we're looking at about a 62 reimbursement rate for this year alone, which could be a deficit up to about $400,000, which we would have to absorb through our operating through budget freezes or end of year surplus not being allocated towards technology or other programs. Because the restructuring of excess cost was supposed to take the guessing out of everything, next year's budget is also budgeted at a 80% reimbursement rate. And we're hoping that that is not going to be a problem for next year. But based on our current outplacements, enrollment for next year, we do have what we call a reserve in our special education tuition line that we will sometimes cut out of the budget throughout the budget process, but it does not look like we will have the opportunity to do so for fiscal 26 based on what we know about excess cost and our placements coming in.
Okay, so, and I'm just asking this because our process is going to go on for a couple of weeks and this may get overturned, may not. That 43 million they're talking about, is there an allocation already that you know of so that we'd know how much of that would come here if it does pass?
No, I don't have how much would be of that 40 million is coming to Berlin.
Yeah.
I do not know. We
Oh,
don't. have those
okay, so maybe we can if it does pass, because it sounds like they're going to do a special session
Yes.
soon.
Yeah.
If it does, maybe we can contact you
Yeah.
during this process to find out if it firms up any of your estimates a little more.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's likely that this is going to go through legislation, only because it was voted like 141 to 5. So, and then that's just an amazing record for people that really support the excess cost. So I have a feeling it is going to continue to go through. But as soon as we get those firm numbers for Berlin, I'll let you know. Yep.
Anything else on revenue? Okay. So transfers, long-term liabilities and capital. Transfers is kind of an easy one this year. There's no change. There is a little bit of movement if you look at the items. The local match for future grants was moved from townwide down to transfers. And the defined benefit legal and actuarial costs were moved from transfers to townwide and police to be mirrored up with where the pensions are. This change was made based on actuarial auditor adjustments that were made at the end of this year, essentially the transfers and expense, and then we recorded the expense in our pension funds. So we're just cutting to the chase and calling it an annual operating cost and avoiding the auditor adjustments there. But net, there's no change. Debt. You're going to be retiring $6.25 million. For those who have been around for a little while, you will remember that for years we've talked about after fiscal year 26, we have $1 million coming off the books, and then a couple more years we have more and more. So this is officially the last budget before we get into that hopeful cliff. The request is to issue $3,585,000. There were several bond items addressed and debated by the council, and this is the number that they landed on, that they would be comfortable with the projects that were brought forward requesting this for bond. They include a second installment for Hubbard HVAC, money for 50% down payment for a new fire vehicle, the sand trap renovations out at Timberland Golf Course. That's about coming up on probably 4 years, Jerry. So, and the Town Hall Library roof replacement. So that's the second part. You'll recall that we used the bond premium from the October bonding to set aside $415,000. So between the two, it would replace the roof on this building and the roof on the library community center. The pensions, the closed pension, as I mentioned, the ADEC is down $357,000. You are truly getting near the end of this. There are only 3 active participants and 11 retirees, so it is truly coming to the end. The police benefit plan is up, and that's basically driven by an increase in staffing. You have more officers, pay goes up, and the cost to put that in there. The performance of the plan has been strong. It's been a little bit above what we had set. Not crazy above, but a little bit above. So you're getting good earnings results. It's just more people, more cost. Not a crazy amount, a couple $100,000. This is a bit of an eye chart for here, but if you look in this was the one I shared a couple weeks ago during the joint meeting. And one of the reasons I wanted to share this is in the past, you would have looked at this and seen a lot of debt from 13. There would have been a 14, 15. Much of that debt has now been refunded, and you will see it in the far right on the October refunding bonds. So you're going to start to see in the next couple of years, a lot of those on the left side are going to just simply come off. Doesn't mean that the principal is gone, but it does mean the interest is gone. You'll recall that we saved about $800,000 in interest costs over the next 10 years by refunding those bonds. So that was a strong positive for the community. You'll see also the continuation of the energy bond, and then the second one from the right is the column for the new bonding, and where that lands you, and then where it puts you for full amounts each year. That brings us to capital. So departments overall requested $12.5 million of capital. After about a 3.5-hour meeting of going through line by line, I know Sal, Tim, you had the pleasure of joining us for that fun time. That number came down to $4.3 million. Its focus is, as it has been the last several years, on public safety, vehicles, machinery, building infrastructure, and recreational infrastructure. This year, as I mentioned during the joint meeting a couple of weeks ago, I would propose maybe thinking about the capital in 2 pieces, one being smaller vehicles and machinery. This is the area that we typically are funding with the surplus. These tend to be annual needs because they are vehicles that are used regularly by our different crews. They are vans to carry school children. They are machinery like mowers and loaders and others that are used almost on a daily basis and are used continually. And then large vehicles and major projects. And as a reminder, the capital budget doesn't account for anything that's truly new. So there's been talk for several years of a community senior center. That's not embedded in these numbers because that's really a decision from the council and from the Board of Finance, and so significant. This is maintaining, repairing, and replacing existing capital is really what this is focused on. So when you look at those numbers, the next slide breaks down what are the items in there. And you can see for the small vehicles and machinery, it's a fairly long list of items that we're requesting. all up, it's about 1.5 million. I think if we could get into the practice of funding this area, as you look out 2 to 3 years, that number would come down substantially because we would get over the hump of some of the catch-up charges that we have to get there, and then to be able to stay at that level. And then finally, the large vehicles and the projects. Some of these have been around for a long time. Mr. Rosso's not here, but the Sage Park lighting upgrades is on this list, and I know there's several people who have championed replacing the lights there, and that's on one of those on the right. There's a number of other items. Each of these was reviewed with the council to make sure that it was something that they considered to be a priority. Now, obviously, in the context of the budget, that they're not saying fund everything. They're just saying, does this make sense as a priority for the town? And these items are on here. You know, so the consideration would be to kind of think at least of the small vehicles and machinery within the budget, so we can start down the path of then utilizing surplus for some of the larger vehicles and projects. Yeah.
A couple of years ago, we had a fairly large outcry about the conditions of some of the playgrounds. That was like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and we funded one since. So none of this is inclusive of any of that. We're not looking forward to do any more of these parks, even though it was a pretty large outspoken.
Little People's
People who.
Yep. Little People's Playground at the end of the road here was done, and there's, yep. The council has approved using LoCIP money to replace the Willard School Playground. That will be the third and last school playground replaced. So that will have been done over the last few years. There have been different discussions about what to do on Worthington Ridge. And there has been discussion as far as part of the East Berlin Pool Park renovation, as if that pool is ripped out, a splash pad is put in there, and utilizing the space for potentially, you know, more playground opportunities. They are not lost, but there are consideration. Yeah. The one that will be quite expensive, needs to be looked at is the one to the right of Willard Playground. So the one that was built for handicapped kids. That one's been around for a while and needs to be looked at as well. It is. It's neat and significant work. I think there's a question about what should go there. At one point, there was discussion of putting the splash pad there, but after reviewing the infrastructure that was in place, that wasn't really a viable option, and that's why that's now being discussed in East Berlin as a replacement in the East Berlin pool. Yep. It does. It does. Yep. Any other questions?
Yeah, Kevin, on this list of capital requests, I know when we had the joint meeting with the town council, and we talked maybe a handful of, you know, major projects, not to this level. And I know in the past, we've said these are priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. You know, none of this stuff in the book has, you know, priorities per se, you know. I'm assuming you guys are saying and gals are saying that this is priority 1 all, or is there different levels to this that you can categorize for us, and top priority, maybe second priority, so that we.
Well, the smaller items have all been identified as high priority.
Okay, I'm just-
Because they are more, I would say, more transactional in nature. You know, they're.
Well, you don't have to answer now, Kev, you know, if, you know, I guess I'm asking the question, that's.
Yeah, I would say everything on the left, which is part of the reason of splitting it that way, they're critical items. We have 3 large mowers, for example, and at one point, all 3 were out of commission, and we had to borrow from a neighboring town. We've heard the discussion about the school vans. I think the number is 18, maybe 17 now after today with one van. But the school vans are really in need of catch-up. And then once you get to that point, similar to police vehicles and some of the other things that we've done, Maintenance is not at the same level, but we need to catch up, and that's why a lot of these have remained on here,
Okay,
because they are really important. And ultimately, what happens is when we get to year end and we go to use surplus, the needs have to supersede any of the wants.
Sure.
Because we just simply need to have them.
so in our last meeting, Jim talked about the tankard. Is that in here or?
The tanker was with the bond,
Okay,
the bonding.
okay,
I assume that's the.
okay. Okay, thank you. Any other question?
I will turn it over to Julia.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. So here we are again, presenting our budget. I feel like it comes quick year over year. I'm going to present the fiscal year 2025-2026 board adopted budget. So I'm just going to start out with the superintendent's goals and talk a little bit about our budget process. So similar to everyone else, our process began a few months ago. And the work our board has been doing in the retreat setting is really making sure that we are coming together as a board, having really important conversations, building relationships, and really grounding ourselves in the goals. And our budget is supported by these goals, the mission, and the core values of the school district. I'm happy to report that our board unanimously voted to adopt this budget, which I think identifies the true needs in this budget. We don't have any wants in our asks. It is a bare bones budget to move forward. Our goal is to provide a quality education, prepare students for multiple options and opportunities, maintain favorable class sizes and course offerings, consistent support of students, staff, and classroom technology, and commitment to a safe learning environment. Our budget reflects the expectations that this community has for our public school system. And then Berlin's mission and core values. We empower our students to be enthusiastic, curious learners, and kind, compassionate leaders in our community and the world. And our core values are purpose, passion, and pride. So I'm going to start out by just showing this pie chart. I think it's important to highlight that, we're coming in with a 6.86% ask. There is not any room to cut. If we do cut, I'll get into that in the next slide of the impact it's going to have. So we're at a $56 million budget with 6.86%. As you can see, staff makes up 82% of this entire budget. And those staff are also the people running all the programs, which goes back to one of our goals to provide options and opportunities for Berlin learners. I know our high school DECA club competed today and one of the teams came in third place. That's really incredibly challenging for DECA. It's a really competitive business club in the state of Connecticut. And knowing that Mr. Jones and Mr. Parisi were able to take the students there and they're able to represent Berlin. 82% of our budget goes towards those options and opportunities. I know that we just had the musical this past weekend, and that was phenomenal. I wasn't able to make it, unfortunately, because my child didn't behave over the weekend, so we had to deal with that. But, everyone who went, they were just blown away. And these are the options and opportunities for students on all ends of the spectrum. So I'm going to get into the next slide where it really breaks it down for us. So the whole red bracket is the 4.37%. That is maintaining staff and benefits, our people and programs. So specific programs that cost money are not in there, but a lot of the staff run programs that are really critical to our district. So if we have the 3.14% increase, which you can see the thick black line going across the red, that leaves us with roughly 700,000 in cuts or 1.3% 1.37% in cuts. So each year we make reductions. We're still losing, we make reductions year over year because what we come in at and ask for, we don't get. We do the absolute best we can with what we have, and then there's reductions. And every year there are staff reductions, but though you might say enrollment is declining or enrollment isn't improving, you can't just always say, okay, well, it's going to impact this second grade class or that fifth grade class. It holistically happens. Um, and, I'm actually just going to, so as you can see, so to bring us to the 4.37%, that's the first bracket on the outside. The overall budget, that includes the contracted services, the tuition and transportation, supplies, equipment, and all other expenditures, and the state mandated reading program. As we've been talking about, I actually met with the state and challenged it because as someone who knows a lot about literacy, I just don't believe in the state's approach to mandating a reading program. So that's, 0.41% of our budget that is mandated. Now, the blue, the 1.19% of our overall, that's our supplies, equipment, all other expenditures. That is always where we cut from. That is our first cut always. And then that's funded with end of year funds. So we don't have a technology replacement cycle as other school districts do. And at this point right now, where we currently stand as a country with the impact of tariffs with China, which I believe just went through today from what my husband was telling me for what he's in IT. And, he had to get all of his orders submitted by Friday before the tariff increase comes. And it's going to be coming and it's going to be impacting all of us. And I just don't see how we can cut that 1.19% out of all years at this point because we're going to have to replace technology. We saw a 3% increase in transportation from New Britain Transportation, which is unheard of. So as we are all feeling this in our own personal financial lives, we're also seeing it here. So I think it's, a very accurate reflection, the 6.86 of what we need, and there's nothing of what we want. I'm going to talk about the major budget drivers. Yes.
Sorry. I thought I had seen it somewhere else where this, in earlier documents, I'm not sure if it was the original budget or whatever. The state mandated reading program was identified as 505,000.
Yeah, so in the superintendent's original proposed budget, it came in at that. Lori Jerpin, who's in the back, she's our curriculum director, and she was able to negotiate a lower rate right in the 11th hour. So this current budget reflects the new negotiated rate, and that's what was in fact adopted by the board.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah, Julia.
It's not, to make sure you make fun, it's not that it's $215,000, it's $360,000. We had some grant funds, the state did allocate some grant funds for it, and we had some extra money that we used this year to offset. But the original quote, before we decided on what program, was $500,000. That's why the budget was increased above the 6 million.
Thank you.
Julia, you talk about the 5-year average,
Yeah, so I'm going to be getting to that
The
shortly.
question I have for you is, you said you've made cuts as a result of not
Yeah.
getting,
Mm-hmm.
but if you look at your chart on page 37, your head count has been pretty stable the last 5 years. As a matter of fact, it's been around 497 for those 5 years, so.
So I don't have the
understand-
full,
Yeah,
okay, I don't have the full presentation. I'm not sure which page
this
37 is.
this one is where you show the.
The
head count.
5-year. Okay, I have it. Yep.
It says it's pretty stable, you know what I mean? And if
Can
this
we-
doesn't,
can
I'm
we just
assuming
get-
this doesn't
Can we
mean.
just let her finish the presentation and then we can ask her questions?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful just because,
Just let her,
Excuse me, I'm just asking the question because it came up on.
no, but we want to hear what she has to say. I want to hear what she has to say.
Okay, let's go.
is everyone okay with me
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So as you can see, these are our major budget drivers. We have the state mandated reading program, technology and equipment, staff accounts, and materials and repairs. So the technology and equipment, we've been staying current. We really haven't been able to increase that. We do need the increase in that. There's increases. The cost is going to increase significantly, whether we believe it or not. It's happening with the tariffs. Staff accounts, that's salaries. Our state so our salaries are at the mean and median for the state, for the DERG, I apologize. And it's really important that we stay there because we want the best teachers teaching the children in Berlin. That is what's expected of all families, and we are not going to get good teachers if we are not paying right in the middle. And then material and repair maintenance costs. So what are we paying for our house? I'm sure we can all see that, how the cost in our own house has increased significantly. To expect our district to be doing any different is unrealistic. So I don't need to get further into that. Are there any questions so far about our 4 major budget drivers? Okay. So as you can see, I just want to point out that special education is roughly 25% of our budget. And general education is about 75% of the general budget. So, state funding is decreasing, federal funding is decreasing, open choice funding is decreasing. And why do we need the increase that we're coming in with, the 6.86%? Because when we're seeing a decrease in funding, it needs to be made up elsewhere. I don't think the town and the families and the people who move here want us to just cut because we're getting cut elsewhere. So you can see the state funding is decreased, the federal.
So how much are we, I know we used to be making 8,000 per pupil, right? When we're at the threshold of 4%? The
Oh, for
choice, sorry, the choice.
Okay,
Is that what we are right now?
so I will get to that right here. So our choice funding, it's hard to see it up there, but you have it. So our choice funding is decreasing. We haven't been at the 4% in a few years, so we are below it. We have 92 open seats in the upcoming year, and we are assuming we will be able to fill 3.59%. It's been really hard for districts who participate in the choice program to fill the seats because ever since the pandemic, and it's nothing about Berlin, it's just all the towns that have been participating in choice. And I believe our reimbursement is 6,000, correct? Okay. So when we're at 4%, it is 8,000. So we would love to have the 4%, but we have not been able to fill the seats.
So Julia,
Yes.
on the state funding,
Yes.
the ECS funding, is there anything in there for ECS funding?
Yep. So no, we didn't include it.
Okay,
This is
so just,
their
What?
grants.
yeah,
Okay,
okay, gotcha, okay,
Not me personally, general government.
okay, thank you.
This year, looking at 6.1 million that goes to the town for having an education system, which is really the state
Gotcha,
refunding or paying for their share of the education. That
Okay.
goes right to the town.
okay, thank you.
And we're expecting 6.1 million, correct?
With the additional money that was spoken of this evening, the 1.1 was approximately 6.1.
So this budget does not account for that because that just goes right to the town. But it is important to say that, without an education system, the town would not be getting that funding. So the 6.1 million roughly.
As far as your chart's concerned, though, is the choice funding included in the bar graph for state funding?
Yes. Any other questions so far? Okay. So now I will get into our 10-year budget funding history, I think it's, you know, important to reflect that over the past 10 years, we were able to bring up our funding to, you know, the 3% average. And I think that's really helped our school system be able to maintain our programs and people. However, we have had to make reductions. You know, I know that it was brought up, and we'll get to this shortly, about the 5-year FTE comparisons. So when we look at and when we talk about reductions in workforce, we're not just talking about FTE. Those are your full-time educators, your certified staff. You know, last year during the budget season, we heard from paraprofessionals. We know that it also is secretarial, custodial, so on and so forth. So when we look at people in programs, we're looking at a lot more than just teachers. So we have received adequate funding, though we've had to make cuts. We have not been able to fulfill what we want as a board for our school district. And so here we all have separate jobs. So over the 10-year budget funding history, this shows what the superintendent's request was and then what the operational adopted budget was. It's important to note that we all have separate jobs here. Us as a Board of Education, we have to assess the needs of the school district, hear from the superintendent and the director of finance, and really hear what they have to say. We have to look at our goals as a board and identify where we want to bring the school district, what we want for the school district. And so as we come to you this evening with our 6.86% ask, some can argue we're trying to be fiscally responsible. We're trying to trim away the fat. We as a board are trying to drive our school district forward and provide an education that is expected of our community. And neighboring districts' adopted budgets are in here. You can see for last year, the 24-25, Berlin received a 3.21. You can look down the list and see these other surrounding towns. We can go back and forth on, you know, are these the towns we want to talk about? It, you know, that's semantics at this point. It doesn't matter what towns we're talking about. I think it just shows that we are doing what we can with what we get. And we've made it work. But at this point, we are all seeing and feeling the inflation in our own lives in every aspect of the, you know, our society and community. And we can't just make do with a 3.5.
So Julie, a quick question
Yes.
on this chart here.
Yeah,
So if you look at the same thing, the same towns for the net per pupil per expenditure,
yes.
Berlin is #1 on top compared to the rest of these towns. So, I mean, you got to be careful how you look at some of these numbers is my point. So I looked at the last, you know, statistics for last year, and Berlin on a net cost per pupils is the highest among these towns.
So I will say that we pull our data consistently from the State Department of Education website. And I think it's really important to be consistent in where we are getting our data. I'm not sure where yours is coming
Same pla-
from.
Same place.
Ashley, do you want to add anything to it? Or I think we're just consistently pulling our data from where other school boards are.
How to be accurate with that, but how that's calculated for each town and then turned into the state, what are the factors in it? What you're looking at this graph here is just basically says, how much is the town?
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah,
Understand.
so.
Well, I think that's two separate things, right? So if you're talking about per pupil expenditure, that's a whole separate topic. Whereas this, we're not talking about the net per pupil expenditure as it relates to this. These are just board adopted budgets that are taken from, you know, SCE and shared.
Understand.
amongst
I'm
other
just trying to add the other perspective to it, that's all.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure it doesn't get confusing to those sitting around the table because they're two very different things. Then you can see our budget percent increase for our DURG. And Berlin is in the red. And again, I think our superintendent and admin and Brian's team have done a very good job at making do with what we have. But currently, like I've said multiple times, it's really hard to make do with what we have and remain status quo in these times. And quite frankly, I don't think the kids should be impacted negatively. So this is our net current expenditure per pupil, to Sal's point. Um, and this is taken from Connecticut State Department of website, and it was posted in October 2024. I don't know if this is what you had questions about, Sal, or if it was,
No, it's, yeah, I got it from the same database. Yeah.
okay.
It doesn't include all these towns though, that, these are not all in your DERG. This chart here that I have that I've been.
Yeah,
presenting
so
at-
we didn't provide the whole budget presentation this
No.
evening, and it was
no
intentional
worries.
because you guys have had our budget presentation for about a month now. I don't think it's necessary to go through slide by slide by
No.
slide of the same presentation. I think this is more to just highlight our DERG to our state comparison, that we are doing what we can with what we have. However, we are currently in a place where the 6.86 is going to be necessary for us to remain status quo.
Mhm.
And I think that's really just the point I'm driving home. This is our historical Berlin net current expenditure per pupil. It's our wealth rankings. So you can see here that it shows year over year from 2014 to 15, all the way through 2023 to 24. And you can see that we are in the red, which is a negative each year, to the state average. And again, this is taken from the Connecticut State Department of Education website, so it's accurate and factual. There's no manipulating the numbers here. It's just straightforward data. So to the 5-year FTE comparisons, I think it's, I know Sal started talking about this, and now here we are. We can continue this conversation. If there are other questions, we should definitely entertain that. But this is not our entire workforce in Berlin Public Schools. And I don't think, this reflects the whole workforce. Last year during the budget season, we heard from a number of people that were worried about losing their jobs. But this is our full-time employee comparison. Yeah, this isn't just our certified teachers.
I'm confused by what you just said. This, when you say this doesn't.
Yeah, so
represent-
initially I was
what's
looking,
missing? What?
no,
you said
I'm
this doesn't
sorry. So,
represent all your workforce in the.
no, it does. I was looking at a different slide I have in my packet. I apologize, because in our original budget presentation, we have that in there. And when Sal pivoted the conversation, I thought that that's what he was talking about. Is that okay?
No,
Okay with me, I didn't
Okay.
understand your comment.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. So this does show our workforce, and it does show, there has been a reduction. Last year there wasn't, but we try and reduce positions, and we try and do without, and then we have to end up bringing them back. Ryan, do you have something you'd like to share?
Speak to it further.
no, I mean, all of my statement was it's kind of flat, you know what I mean? So to say, I'm
Kind
sure
of
there's
what?
pluses and minuses that happen throughout, but it is flat versus saying that you didn't get enough budget and therefore we had to make cuts. That's all I'm just trying to understand.
The years. Assistant superintendent, we cut, central office employee left.
Understand.
So there's been some large cuts. When you look at, yes, relatively 23, 24, 25, 4 teachers were reduced last year. A central office administrator. I think the biggest thing is the gap between the 4-point-something% to maintain staff, contractual obligations, and insurance benefits, and getting 3%. There's a $500,000 plus swing there, which typically means you're gonna lose staff or programming at some.
Okay.
I think another piece to keep in mind is 280 apartments are scheduled to be available. And whether people are going to say families will be there or not, I don't think there's any restrictions on them. So some people may not have to raise their kid in a 1-bedroom apartment, but other people need to. So I think we can anticipate that's going to have an impact on our district, where reducing our workforce isn't going to do us any favors. with
So-
the budget.
Comment on that.
Yeah.
I've seen these proposals come in when I sat on P and Z, analysis is done or whatever. And they show for the mix of housing that's going in, like studio apartments and one bedrooms, which are the vast majority of these things. But the increase in students, when they look at other towns and whatever, is some increase, but it's not that great. It's when you get the complexes that have the 3 and 4 bedroom apartment complexes in them, then you'll see the school rates go up fairly dramatically. That's just not what is being built in Berlin.
So I would be interested to see how it pans out compared to historical data that is available, because I think our economy is in a much different place. Interest rates are significantly higher. People are having trouble buying. Credit card debt is at its all-time highest, and in the past 4 years, renting is more of an option. And I think when families are struggling financially, they need a rent that they can afford, so they're going to put multiple people in a one-bedroom apartment. And parents are allowed to do that.
I guess my comment on that is, we'll see.
Right, exactly.
What actually happened versus speculating on what we might think we have. We have a lot of things we can speculate on what we might have coming up. I mean, the other thing I wanted to ask is when our contracts are up, because in talking with a couple other people that I know that are in different towns where their contracts have come up, this isn't a negative on anything, but they're saying, because of the shortage of teachers and all that, that these rates are going sky high.
Sky high. And I
That's
will,
the thing we gotta be cognizant of going forward also, that we're gonna have some significant cost increase from labor perspective, just with the staff we have going.
so we've settled most of our contract negotiations over the past few months. And I will say that when we did have the teacher contract come in, we were, towards the beginning of the state averages. So I would say that, we settled in, a very favorable place where teachers are going to want to come to Berlin, but we are not, giving away the house. I think another thing that the Board of Ed, as well as the administration, worked on is finding things that we can add to the teacher contract and other contracts as well to make Berlin a great place to come work, where it's not necessarily costing us money, or directly through salaries and benefits. One great thing that was negotiated was when we bring teachers from other districts who have experience, because we want good teachers. It's hard to find teachers who want to not sometimes leave their district because they don't want to give up all their sick pay. So we added something where they can bring some of their sick pay. It's at the discretion of the superintendent. But that's truly unique, where we're not necessarily adding more financially. We might pay it, if they go on FMLA or need sick leave, but it's not something coming right out. Is there anything else you'd like to add about the contracts? Sure.
I think the point, you bring up a very good point, and 2 of the board retreats talked about sustainability plan and retention and attracting and retaining teachers. There's definitely a teacher shortage out there, and the demographics of the school district will depend on the educators you bring in today for where the district's gonna be in 20 years. So we've never paid at the top step, we always paid in the middle, but one is the working environment, the professional development we offer, and, the type of district they're gonna work in, how they're treated, the respect level that they get, and so on. It's a great community with wonderful students without huge additional problems. But being competitive when you have, and having a budget that usually ends in May is not helpful to the Board of Education. Because we can't go out and hire teachers until we know where the budget's set, if we're gonna hire them. And what happens is those teachers that are coming out of the colleges, if you need a physics teacher or a math teacher, you can't go out and attract them and retain them early. So the other districts that can end up hiring those teachers. So that's not allowing us to get the best of just one point. And I could share numerous stories about teachers that are coming to the district that are leaving tenured positions with 13 or 14 years in other districts because of Berlin's reputation in the educational system. We had a teacher math opening last year, we posted it. We had 2 substitute teachers that we had to terminate within a year. So the educational students was not at the level it should have been. We then posted as a full-time position, needed it. We had a teacher leave in surrounding town, taught there for 10 years, is now teaching with us currently. And she said she wanted 2 districts. She wanted Glastonbury or Berlin. But what I'm trying to say to you, gentlemen, and Denise, is keeping Berlin's educational system where we can provide those opportunities and still attract and retain high-quality teachers will allow students today to get the same education that your children got when they went to school, because it is very competitive educational market right now. And the board is well aware of that. The other thing is, with population decreasing, as you're seeing, teachers who teach in Berlin, if they opt to send their children to school in Berlin, and they provide the transportation, and there's no additional cost, so there's no additional services, they pay a fee to allow them to attend Berlin Public School with approval. We don't have
So
to-
the additional services he's talking about are like special ed costs.
We're trying to do other incentives to attract and retain staff also. And one thing we feel is that if you work for an organization, you're a proud organization, you want to educate your own children in that organization. And we said, we see one teacher did that after working here for 15 years, they just bought a house in Berlin a month ago. They sent both their kids for part of the year, and now they're living in Berlin. So, some of those are incentives that we're working on, but I think you're right on about how to stay competitive in a tough market.
So hypothetically speaking, given the last 4 or 5 years that I've been around, you guys have made cuts to the BOE itself, the organization, the high school and middle school. If you guys don't get this money, I presume the elementary schools are going to get the cuts at this point in time.
It's easier to cut elementary classes, but it's going to have to really be evaluated by Brian and his staff. But it's easier to make bigger elementary classes, which is really unfortunate because larger classes are not better at all. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
So you guys have talked about the potential of what would happen, right?
Talked about potential since October amongst the cabinet members that we don't believe the elementary can go unscathed with a budget cut. We're at a point at the high school where not receive enough credit. We really can't receive that. And the biggest question is, what we like to do when a teacher retires, it's possible not fill the position,
Mhm.
because the message we don't want to send out in a small state is Berlin's cutting teachers every year. That's not going to attract teachers to come to Berlin and to want to work in Berlin Public Schools. So that's been the message that we tried to work with it. If someone retires, can we move people? Can we shift? Can we shift them to the elementary? If they're leaving the middle school, do they have appropriate certification? Is there a way to retain the teacher?
I think to Brian's point, it's really important to recognize that the state puts out a mandated number of credits students need for a high school with certain classes in certain areas. So your hands are really tied, and how you can cut. And then also at the middle school level, like you need to really prepare the students to then enter high school. They're just very difficult decisions, but we have not put together anything at this point.
Okay, any other questions for Julie?
The only one I have is, what is this unaffiliated category?
That's people who are not in the union.
That would be, payroll coordinators, HR coordinators, our ESOL tutors,
PPS.
commissioners. So just basically anybody who's not, under a union contract is considered our IT department.
IT.
considered
Okay.
So you have, your food service workers are unionized, paraprofessionals are unionized, teachers are unionized, administrators are unionized. Your tech is not unionized, your ISS is not, in-school spec supervisor is not unionized. There's a small handful that are not in a union, those are unaffiliated.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just a couple, just observations when I went through the detail budget, Julia. You know, the detail sheets. I do look at those,
I know you do.
but, and you don't have to answer that now, but, in those other categories, or those last three categories, you know, I went through, you know, the supplies, equipment, all that.
Hmm.
There were several categories where, put aside the reading program, the new read, that there was substantial increase. I mean, 50%, 100%. I was just curious, you know, if I could send, you know, some questions, can you give me some answers regarding, you know, maybe there's a handful in each of those? Yeah, so that I can understand what the big increases in those areas are.
Yeah, so we didn't include those slides in here. I know exactly what you're talking about. But also if you look at the total number, it is fairly small.
Yeah.
So you might see like a 50% increase, but it's reallocation from one
Okay.
to another.
Okay. We're just- Okay, I mean, just a handful in those areas, so, okay, thank you. Any other questions, Julie? Okay, thank you.
So I just want to conclude with, these are some of our 23-24 recognitions, and we also just ranked number 26 in what in the state, according to money.com, number 26 in the state of Connecticut for high schools. And I think that's really, really impressive. But I think these are some of the great recognitions that we have. We're able to provide our students with a lot of options and opportunities through internships, work study programs, our high school capstone, different clubs and activities at the middle school level, the sports, and just, really trying to do what's right and best for the Berlin learners. So, we came here today with an ask of 6.86%. There really isn't much to cut from at this point. I know that we see a substantial increase on the town side as well, which I think shows that, we are all trying to do what's best for our, our school, our town, our community, in difficult times. So, you know, please send the questions to me. I will make sure Ashley and Brian get the answers to them. I'll share them with the rest of the board as well. And, I know we all have our own separate jobs to do, so thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Julia. All right. I'm back. Is everyone awake out there? So hold on, bear with me here while I work the slides. All right, so I'm back to talk about the general government. And so I'll go to the next slide here. So I want to show you, and it's a little bit difficult to read it from here, but this is the general government operations and some points here. I'm not going to spend too much time, but I want to highlight where we're going up. And if you look at townwide, now it's up about 9%, but it's about $137,000 increase. And this is because we have 2 open union contracts in fiscal 26. And in fiscal 25, we only had 1. So that is the reason for that increase there. And I want to talk about public safety. So this year, I did have a number of requests for new additional employees, and I did have, out of what was presented to me, I did make about $500,000, $545,000 worth of cuts, and with that were several new positions that were requested. There was a position requested in the Parks and Rec department, as well as in the Senior Center department. And coming in, I wanted to make sure that my mentality, being someone new, is if we got through fiscal 25. Okay, let me get acclimated. Let's take a look at the needs for next year. Public safety was a little different because I know that the town of Berlin has prioritized public safety here. And so we've had a goal to get to 50 officers, I believe. And so we currently are at 46 that is funded. And actually, I had the privilege of attending a swearing in ceremony last week. Was it last week now? Yeah, and that was really nice. And so we are up to 46 officers. So I left the 2 in, as well as a part-time administrative position in the police department. And so with the new police accountability laws, there's always the need to redact the body camera footage, and that is time consuming. And so that was in last year. I actually watched last year's presentation, and I saw Rosha, he presented and said, well, maybe it'll be back next year. And so I did leave that in as well. So those are the 3 new positions that I left in the budget for your consideration. And so that's why there is that increase there. And then the other large increase that you'll see here is in community development, and that's the big ticket item here. And I did speak about that a little earlier, and that's with the Public Building Commission budget and the need or potential need for architecture and design work. There's $450,000 budgeted, or $50,000 per project. And we'll get to more of that. There's a slide for that. So I do want to show, as far as general government staffing goes, we did have some some changes. There was a move from half a position in the assessor's office that moved to the land use office, as well as a reduction in the economic development department as well, that transitioned to, it transitioned to, what is it? Professional services, that's right. And so overall, there's a 1.5 increase in full-time employees in fiscal 26 that I'm proposing. And as I mentioned, that is all with public safety. So that is for your consideration as well. And then here, so what drives the $2.2 million general government increase? So, and forgive me, because I'm having a little hard time reading it from here as well. But so if you see the red bar right there that goes through the middle of the graph, you'll see that, you know, the items on the bottom are the big ticket items that are kind of baked into the budget. These are your contractual agreements, your wage increases that are already built in, your liability insurance, your health benefits, and so it's no secret every town is dealing with the same increases. I think we had budgeted a 10% increase in health insurance for this year, and that's just across the board. I dealt with that in my previous town as well. It just keeps going up, and unfortunately, you know, we have to provide good health insurance for our employees. So you know, we do have to do those things. You'll see the new employees. That is the top bar. That's the public safety that I talked about. And then the contractual services, those are the projects that I mentioned with the PBC as well. And so we'll go to that. And then the miscellaneous operating expenses, there's $111,000. And this is made up of a number of incremental modifications throughout various departments, but overall it's $111,000 of new monies being spent across those departments. And so we can go through that, but this is just a high level. So here's the breakdown of the new employees, and this shows you know, our officers, both of them is they're $142,000 each for the new police officers. And then you can see that part-time administrative position of 43.8 thousand. And so overall, that is your increase, and those are all your new employees. It's all on the public safety line right there. And so, and I'm not to say that the other departments that were not funded this year, that there wasn't a need for that. We're going to look at that and take a look at the needs of the departments. But overall, I think all of our department heads are doing a really great job managing their departments very well. And so we want to continue providing the high level of service for our residents. And that really is the priority here, as well as keeping costs in check, as I know the Board of Finance is aware. So here are the main drivers of contractual services. And so you'll see here that this is that $50,000 A&E cost that I mentioned. And so I know, Sal, you had mentioned the priorities, and what are the priorities? And so I think that's a great question. I'm still getting acclimated to what are the priorities here in Berlin. And that's why we have these 9 projects in, because I think it would be helpful for the Board of Finance as well as the town council to give us that direction. And so I believe each one of these projects on here is very important to the town. They're all going to have to get done eventually. It's just a matter of timing and when what do you want to do first? And so you'll see the library, community center, chiller replacement. I know that we are seeking steep funding for that. That's correct, Doug? Yeah. So we're trying to move forward with that. If we can get that steep funding, that would be a big help on that. The town hall front plaza replacement. I know there's been some potential flooding issues, or not flooding, but water water damage issues that can come about. And so that is important. The library at the bathrooms, renovating those library bathrooms, and then town hall window replacement. I know that's been talked about for a long time. The Timberland on-course bridges, I know that has been a priority as well. Percival pool renovations. And then I did have a nice sort of thank you to Ashley for showing me around all of the schools in Berlin. And I got to see those McGee science classrooms up close. And I will say they are a little dated, so we can probably, that'll definitely have to get done at some point. And then the basketball and tennis court reconstruction at McGee as well, and then the auditorium. It was funny because I walked into the auditorium and I said, "Oh my God, this is beautiful," and Ashley said, "Look closer." So I think it's a great space, but those are the projects that we put for your consideration this year. And so I'll go to the next slide, and it's just questions. Do you guys have any questions on any of that? Okay. So next is the Berlin water control. I'll go over this briefly with you. It's pretty straightforward. It shows the water fund expense and the sewer fund total expense for fiscal year 2026. And, the budget drivers here, there are no staffing changes. And I know that we budgeted for Mattabassett rate increases this year. And then there are additional costs for the engineering work for the Meriden connection that we've been working on. And I know Kevin, myself, and Ray, and we're trying to make sure that we can get this project funded. It's important under our capital needs. We were hoping for some DWSRF funding. We may be able to get these projects done, or at least the Meriden water line connection. Without it, it's a little bit tricky for federal funding right now. And so given that, since we have the reserves, we might be talking to the town council about another way to do it. But right now we have that in for capital needs. And then the Lamentation tank, there is a corrosion issue that needs to be resolved over there. I don't know if how familiar you are all with that, but that is something that needs to be addressed, that we're working to address and currently. And then the Kensington water line extension, and then Berlin Turnpike pump station. And that's a replacement, Ray? Is the pump station there? Yes, an upgrade. Any questions on any? Yep, Jerry?
Looking at the sheet, water fund total expenditures. Last year's budget was 4,450,000, and this year is 2,675,000.
Yeah, Kevin, sorry, that one is a good question. And
Why? Can we make our budget go down like that?
Last year's budget included some appropriations of reserves for some capital projects. And they were not done. They were done, we did some borrowing, and they're not repeating. So it's just
So they ran them through their budget last year.
ran it through the budget, but ultimately used borrowing and were able to complete.
Okay.
He's also, Ray has done a really good job with his team and with the outside folks on also delivering a number of projects under budget. So that has been very helpful in upgrading the capital at a lower than expected cost.
Okay, thank you.
We try to do that on the general fund side too.
Good question, though.
So so the swearing from yesterday, I believe, right? The two members, it was last week.
Officers, yes.
What is the number now? That is
46.
46. And how many, without including FTO, are actually on the road right now?
We have 2 in FTO.
Yep.
2 in the Coast Academy, 2 we just hired that will be going to the New Britain Academy soon. 1 of the 3 that were on FTO just went off on his own. The other 2 will be going off on their own very soon.
40.
40.
So we'll have 4 that are gonna be about another year before we get them. let
Yeah.
go.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else for me? It's good.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Sal, before you guys adjourn, just a reminder, the next meeting is Thursday. That's in Doc Mac. This room was reserved, so that'll be the one meeting not here.
okay,
And the police leadership, as well as representatives of the police commission, will be there. I know you had asked for their participation, so you'll be able to dig deeper into the staffing and vehicles and other questions that have come up in the past. But
The vehicles are in here.
Right, yes. Okay, I want to thank all the presenters. Thanks for everyone in attendance. We have a lot of information to absorb, so we're going to take some time to look at everything and have our work sessions, and I'm sure that we'll have responses from the public also, in our forthcoming meetings. So thanks for everyone for attending. Thank you for the presentations.
Motion adjourned.
All those in favor? So moved.